The Knockando Woolmill is the oldest continuously working rural mill in the UK. The first recorded operators of the mill were William and Anne Grant. That was in 1784. They ran the Walk Mill in their croft or small farm, processing wool for local spinners and weavers.
There were little mills like this everywhere that were serving local communities. We're talking, before mass communications, etc. So farmers would bring their wools here, and it was local trade, and they were everywhere, but this is the last one.
People would bring fleeces in, and they would take away, they'd be converted at the wool mill, and they'd be take away tweed, cloth, knitting yarn, whatever they wanted. Serve the local community. And actually went on doing that until the 1960s. People can still remember bringing the fleeces here and taking away cloth. Most of these mills, there were quite a lot of them in North East Scotland, most of them disappeared between the two world wars. Somehow the wool mill just carried on.
In the early years, almost everything was done by hand. Then, as the Industrial Revolution spread throughout the country, more and more of the work was mechanised, the giant water wheel at the heart of the process.
This is an encapsulation actually of the history of textiles really, and the way that the Industrial Revolution spread northwards, and the evolution of textile machinery. We took over in 1976 in fact, and I took over from Duncan Stewart. He was 78 at the time and semi-retired, should we say. Still had 12 cows at the time because this was a farm. And he taught me an awful lot. I mean, he was forgetting, I was learning, and he was a great man. He was a great man. I mean, a solid working man with actually a good sense of humour. Yeah.
You come in the morning and he's looking at his watch, and tells you.
They're too late in the morning and not punctual enough. I've had more holidays in the time than I had in 50 years.
As the textile process became mechanised, the tenants here would hear about it, they'd get second or third hand machinery up from Yorkshire or up from the borders, and they would extend the mill there a bit to cover the machines.
These wonderful contraptions are the result of human inventiveness and robust Victorian engineering. The same machinery has continued to serve the mill's owners for almost 1.5 centuries. But time takes its toll, and by the end of the 20th century, it became clear that a fundamental overhaul was needed to save the buildings and their contents for the future.
The textile machinery was listed by Historic Scotland, and then later on the whole site was A-listed by Historic Scotland as of international importance. The whole place was falling to pieces, literally. So the Knockando Woolmill Trust was set up. Hugh gave the mill to the Trust, and the Trust started on the road to raise the money to renovate the whole place, very much in conjunction with Hugh.
The Trust energetically set about drawing up conservation plans. The project only just missed out on winning a BBC competition, which would have provided much of the funding. But by this time the momentum had been built up, and just as throughout the history of the Knockando Woolmill, there was no stopping it.
By 2010, I think we'd got all the £3.5 million needed, which was pretty fantastic, and we started on the renovation process.
For 2 years, the Trust and their contractors toiled. Machinery was meticulously taken apart, repaired and reassembled.
We're just getting everything trued up and get a good check through everything. We've got, actually these are new bearings in here because these were shot. Others we've been luckier with. We found quite a lot of breakage that would really be due to just stress and strain, quite a lot of wear. I mean, little things like this down here. This is a rail, this is where the individual spindles come up. I mean, there's 60 spindles right across this rail. Well, you can see, these are cracked. So we're going to make new ones of these. You've got to go through it all. This is probably one of the biggest pinions in the place. And he's fine, all except he's lost 5 half teeth there. So the trick there is we'll put little pegs in here, drill down, and then we'll braze onto that, and then we can cut them back. So we've still got half a good tooth. It's dentistry, basically.
The buildings were treated to new roofs, new floors. Masonry was rebuilt.
The whole architectural and design team and the main contractor have done a really good job.
By 2012, the bulk of the rebuilding work was complete, and the wool mill was ready to begin work once again.
So here we are teasing and putting this wool through the very first machine in the process, which is a teaser. And we're taking clean wool here that we've added a little bit of oil back to lubricate the fibres as they're worked. And we're running it through this machine and a blower system ready for it to go on the cards. Well, here we are. This is the feed to the carding set, and this is a nice wool for us to use. It's got a very nice length to it. It works for our machines about 3 to 4 inches of the individual fibre lengths, and it makes a nice knitting yarn, which is what we're making out of this. You know, just a nice white knitting yarn. And prior to this, it will go through the blending, and once it's right through the system, through the cards, through the spinning, we end up with hanks of wool, which we've spun on the spinning mule, and then we twist together, and then we turn into hanks, ready for knitting. There it is. So this hopper over the top is an automatic feed onto the machine. Then carding runs through the machine. You have the various rollers on here. They all have functions, obviously. None of these actually touch each other. They're basically running the wool through the system till we get to the far end here, where we fly comb it off. The wool is being taken off the machine, the main machine, by this roller, brought underneath and then chopped off into a stream, up over the top, down the other side, and then through this traveller, which lays it back on at right angles. The reason we actually do that is gets us around the corner, but also it equalises any weight differences, or you know. So what we're getting here is a very, very even feed, side to side, into this machine. More carding. Same idea. Here, taken off by a comb here, but then run sideways and put through this spinner, which, look, turns it into a bit of a rope. A slubbing, as we call it, comes round, and the slubbings are wound onto these balls, right? So there's one finished, okay? These fit up into this gate. There's 30 of them, 10, 10 and 10. Separate streams run into this machine, this last machine, the condenser, and run in slowly and taken off fast at the other end. They're taken off the machine by these rings this time, brought underneath, taken this way, and as you can see, between these rubbers, which rub side to side, and they just turn it round, and they rub it round, and if you look, that's the ends coming off. Now those are threads, effectively, but they've got no twist in them. They're just all the fibres laid up and ready. These bobbins here, or spools actually, you take this spool off, there's 15 there, 15 there, that's your 30 going in the other end, okay? And these spools then come over for spinning. As the mule comes out, the delivery rollers are delivering this unspun thread. About 2/3 of the way out, the delivery rollers stop, but the carriage keeps going, and it draws the thread level, takes the lumps out of it. You'll probably see this happen. We'll try it now, and we'll see how we go. So there we have delivery, and then It stops, but the carriage keeps coming. Just pulls it out a bit, inserts the right amount of twist, and now the faller wires guide the thread as it's winding up, and then we go again. There's the faller wires just come in there. Okay, so we've spun the yarn, we've plied it together. This is a 2-ply yarn, and I'm just going to make some sample hanks out of it on this old machine, which has got to be one of the oldest things here, because all it does is make hanks. So let's just get it started. Okay. Every turn is about 2 yards. And I've got this set so that when the bell rings, I know we've got enough on. That's us. When it gets very high tech, we collapse the frame and off they come. Yeah. Oop. There are 3 hanks of yarn, all tied off. We put those together.
Traditionally, the tweed made at Knockando has been for the local estates. It's very much a performance fabric. It has to stand up to the rigours of the hill and weather, and so it's a fairly robust cloth. We work very closely with estate owners, and they sometimes have their existing tweed, other times they want to develop a new tweed. So we need to establish the type of pattern that they want, whether it's a window pane type of design or a Glen check type of design or a gun club. One of the important things with the estate tweed is that the colours blend into the surrounding countryside. Rivers, rock, heather, hill, and the colours that are used in specific estates very much reflect those colours. It is in fact a camouflage. Some of the patterns might look quite bold close up, but actually when they're on the hill at a distance they blend in tremendously well. We've recently developed a stock supported bunch of our own tweed patterns. These don't actually pertain to any estates, but they're all very much of that ilk, and it enables people to buy shorter lengths of fabric if they just want to cover a chair or to make a sports jacket. With the Knockando tartan, there's an iconic window down in the old mill which has got one large pane of glass surrounded by smaller panes. And when we were developing our house tartan, we wanted to try to incorporate that in the check. So you can see in the pattern we have one large pane surrounded by smaller panes, and the colours very much reflect the area, the old rust roof of the mill buildings, and the blue from the Knockando burn that flows past, and the green from the fields. And then there's a small amount of gold for the whisky. Being in the heart of Speyside, we felt it was appropriate.
Okay, so we're upstairs in the wool mill in the upper story, which is somewhere where the public never get to go, health and safety and all of that. And I'm making a warp, which is the lengthways threads. This is for a piece of tweed. This will be a piece of tweed about 60 metres long once it's finished for a customer. And each of the threads in this cloth has to be put up in order. Now I'm travelling with 32 threads here in my hands. So every time I go from top to bottom, or bottom to top, I put up 32 threads of that warp. And right across the piece of cloth there are 1900 threads, so I've got to go up and down quite a few times, as you can imagine, 60 times or something. But I don't have to stop, because when I get to the top here, I can turn the pattern just there. Okay. Now what I'm doing here is I'm picking up the pattern, which is actually, if you look, there's actually 2 fawn and 2 blue in here. Okay. And I'm just picking up the pattern one by one on my fingers, kind of playing cat's cradle, and they can't get out of order. Now I'm going to put them up on these pegs. These pegs substitute for my finger and thumb. Up the top, there, there, there. The order of the pattern is kept there. So we make order out of chaos, and we go back down again. And this is the way we've made cloth at Knockando for, well, ever since the start, really. The warp's finished now. Just got to take it off the pegs now. I've got it tied off top and bottom, so we can take it off like this, hopefully. Go. So, and we just walk down and kind of take it off. I need to get it bundled up so that I can unbundle it as easily. So I'm chaining it, I'm making a chain out of it. That's what I'm doing. So yeah, this is the second half. I've already done one half, so if you like, I've done from the left-hand side to the middle of the cloth, and this is from the middle to the right-hand side. It'll make more sense when we put it on a weaving beam, which we're going to do in a minute. All right. So here we have the warp that we made upstairs. And put them into chains, brought them downstairs, have now attached them to a warp beam. You go up over this beam here, down, through the warp beam and through these dividers. This is called a raddle, and that sets it to width. And now we're going to turn it on and hopefully wind the warp on. Keeping the tension right, eh, Keith?
Yes, sir.
Absolutely. All right, okay, here we go. Okay, so we've wound it onto the beam, we've wound the warp onto the beam, and I'm putting in these rods here. We're putting these in, these are called lee rods, the lease, and this is the pattern. The order of threads, they go, thread goes, first one goes over, under, next one goes under, over, and then vice versa. And then we're going to take this beam through into the weaving workshop and fit it into the loom, and then tie in the threads into the loom. There we go. Oh, crash. So now we've moved the beam with our warp on it We set it up in the loom, and here are the ends of it. This is the start of it. And I'm literally tying it in onto the last job. The last job that was through here was exactly the same sort of cloth. So it's the same number of threads across, same type of threads. And so we can just pull the whole lot through, and we don't have to rethread through these shafts here, which is very useful. It's a quicker process. Okay, so it's all tied in now. There's 1,900 new threads tied onto 1,900 old ones, and we'll start to pull it through. So I'll wind the new one through, bringing the knots up to the shafts, and we'll just give everything a bit of a pull to help it along. Get this right, and it's easy. Get it wrong, and it's horrible. Here they come through now. Wind off enough so that I can cut off the old stuff, and then I'm going to tie it on to what we call the beam cloth here. Okay, so now we've got the threads through, and we're going to tie on to this beam cloth. Just tie all these threads onto this bar, and then we can start to weave. Just sort them out, bring them through. Once these are all tied, we can start to weave. Okay, so we're all tied in and we're ready to start weaving, which means that we're going to put the weft in with the shuttles. Let's have a look. We'll throw the first one through. I've just thrown that shuttle through, and it's trailed the first weft thread after it. Let's see. There goes another. So here's our cloth, started, checked it over, it looks very good, everything, the pattern's correct, all the threads. So what's happening is that warp that we made upstairs, then we put on the beam, then we tied into the loom, pulled through, tied it on, we've started weaving it. Each one of those threads passes through a heddle. So it's just a wire with a hole in it, and these heddles are strung on shafts. There's 8 shafts here. So each of these shafts has got 1/8 of the threads on it. First thread, second thread, third, fourth, fifth, and so on, threaded across. Now we've got control on these threads. So when we drop 4 of them, all the threads that are on these shafts are down here, and all the threads that are here are up here. And across there, we've just thrown a shuttle which has trailed a thread after it. This, called the lay, comes forward, beats that thread into the cloth, into the fell of the cloth. The shafts will then change. Let's watch that. So, loom comes forward, this comes forward, beats the thread up in, shafts are changing. We come, oh, this is hard. We come down the other side, and here is the next shuttle, just on its way. Shuttles are driven by a program chain up in there, the dobby. This is the teasel gig, the teasel raising machine. This centre drum here will revolve at high speed, and if you look, they're loaded with teasels. These are not the sort you would normally find in your garden. They actually have a wee barb on the end, and there's bars of them loaded on. This spins at high speed, and cloth is brought close to it, and it raises. It lifts a pile on the cloth, typically for blankets in this mill. And because years ago, we don't do it so much now, but a lot of blankets were made here. And here we are, this is the tensor frame. This is for drying cloth. It's been washed, and in order to dry it correctly, you need to stretch it out to width. We've got about 60 yards long here. We can put a piece of cloth on. We pin one edge to the hooks on the top here, and one down to the bottom, tension down the bottom, and the cloth will sit here in the nice bright sunshine, perhaps a bit of wind, and dry off.
The machinery was originally run by water power, and one of the things that the Trust wanted to do was to get the water wheel going again. So this was completely stripped down, put back together again, and amazingly it is going really well. And what we're going to do is to actually generate some power from that. And so we now have this wonderful place which will still be manufacturing cloth and selling cloth, but we have a visitor centre where people can see the history of the mill. We have a lovely cafe, and we have a shop. And we have an education centre.
To some extent, yes, it has been a modernisation, but one which has sympathetically retained all the features that make this mill unique, but without the threat of the roof falling in. Our restoration can be seen as merely another chapter in the history of Knockando Woolmill, another twist in an unbroken thread.